No more silence. The surviving R. Kelly docuseries was one of the most viewed documentaries of 2019. 20 million viewers had a front row seat to hear the sexual abuse allegations against the king of R&B. Social media outlets were buzzing with dialogue within the Black community concerning the sexual victimization of Black women and girls. Many of the comments were as follows: where were their parents? They're only doing this for the money. They should have known better. They should not have been acting grown. And they're just trying to bring a Black man down. You know, I've learned how to separate the music from the man. The man doesn't have anything to do with the music. And we even heard celebrities echo the same sentiments. Many of the comments were coming from Black women. Unfortunately, I was not shocked by these comments because Black women have had a long history of protecting sex offenders in our families. The R. Kellys in our families were our uncles and grandfathers, brothers, cousins, boyfriends, stepfathers, biological fathers, pastors, deacons, coaches, boyfriends of our mothers, foster or adopted parents, or our sisters' boyfriends. I would argue that we didn't want to protect them, but we knew that the same accusations hurled at R. Kelly's victims would be leveled against us if we were to ever tell. Black women are groomed to protect Black men, even at the expense of ourselves. In other words, in the words of Nancy Boyd Franklin, we raise our daughters and love our sons. The raising of our daughters have left them virtually unprotected. According to Black Women's Blueprint, 60% of Black girls experience sexual assault by the time they reach the age of 18. In 2010, the Centers for Disease Control, unveiled 12% of the African American females reported having been physically forced to have sexual intercourse. Early sexual trauma often sets the stage for Black girls to be re-victimized later in life. The National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey revealed that approximately 1 in 10 Black women have experienced rape at some point in their lives. Just under 41% of Black women reported sexual violence other than rape in their lifetime. So even though our bodies bear the scars of sexual violence, we are still silent. Come journey with me and meet a woman by the name of Tamar who knows what it's like to be violated by someone she knew. Tamar was the princess from the tribe of Judah. Tamar's father was David. Her mother was the daughter of a Canaanite king. And Brower argues that Tamar grew up in the palace of Jerusalem and lived during Israel's golden years under the reign of her father David and her half-brother Solomon. Although Tamar lived during the golden years of David's dynasty, her personal life was not that glamorous. The source of Tamar's pain all started with her half-brother Amnon. He had become depressed and frustrated because of his overwhelming desire to sleep with her. As the king's virgin daughter, she was inaccessible or guarded due to her status in David's regime. Virginity in a patriarchal culture is a representation of status and family honor. Amnon had an obligation to protect his sister and not perpetrate against her. Desperation leads Amnon to discuss his distress with his cousin Jonadab. Jonadab devises a plan for Amnon to enact to get Tamar alone. He suggested that Amnon pretend to be sick, have his father David come visit him. During David's visit, Amnon is supposed to request his sister Tamar come and make him some cakes to get her alone. Amnon follows this manipulative plan of Jonadab, and David sends for Tamar to prepare food for her brother. Woodbridge and Joubert argue, contrary to popular opinion, sexual violence is not always a spontaneous act, but most sexual abuse is premeditated and planned. It is also plausible for perpetrators to operate within a network of offenders. Terry and Ackerman report that 8% of offenders talk to other offenders before committing abuse. However, Tamar is unaware of the motives of Amnon. Tamar prepares the food and places it on a pan for her brother to eat. Amnon refuses to eat and instructs her to send everyone out from his quarters, thus leaving Tamar alone with Amnon. The majority of perpetrators operate in isolation. Also, the abuse is more likely to take place in the home of the perpetrator, familiarity, so that they can control who comes and who goes. He requests Tamar to bring the food in the chamber so that he might eat from her hand. And when Tamar brought the food near him, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, my sister." Tamar pleads with her brother by stating, "No, my brother, do not force me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do any so vow. As for me, where could I carry my shame? As for you, you would be one of the scoundrels in Israel. Now, therefore, I beg you, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." I side with many of the feminist biblical scholars. They believe that Tamar's appeal concerning her reputation, Amnon's status, and the petition to ask for her hand in marriage was an attempt to buy time and to avoid sexual violence. Many Black women and girls can relate to Tamar. We know what it's like to plead with our perpetrators to recognize our humanity, but it was not enough to stop them from hurting us. Black women and girls might have thought, if I reminded the perpetrators that I'm your daughter, I'm your sister, I'm your wife, I'm your church member, I'm a foster child, maybe it would humanize us enough and protect us from being abused, but it did not. Amnon refused to listen to her. He was stronger than she. He forced her to lay with her. And after Amnon sexually brutalized Tamar, he had his servant put her out. Tamar was distraught, riddled with shame and embarrassment, and cried aloud as she made her way home to her brother Absalom. Absalom inquired about the sexual assault, and he orders her to be quiet for now. When her father David heard about Tamar's rape, he was angry, but he would not punish Amnon because he loved him, because he was his firstborn. I would argue it's hard to punish someone who struggles with the same issue you do. I know it's hard to hear because the Black church, we love David. But do me a favor, church. Do me a favor, preacher. Stop preaching that Bathsheba had a choice, because we know there is no choice in the patriarchal culture in the Bible. But that's another sermon for another time. So what can the Black community do to help Black women and girls heal from sexual trauma? The first thing we can do is tell the truth about the tears. I'll say it one more time. Tell the truth about the tears. After Tamar's sexual assault, she is kicked out of Amnon's house, and on her way back to her brother Absalom's house, verse 19 states, she puts ashes on her head, tore the long robe she was wearing, and she put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Brower asserts that Tamar put ashes on her head, voicing her devastation and grief. She tears her special garment, voicing tragedy and death. She cries out, voicing injustice and oppression and anguish. In other words, Tamar went public about her sexual assault. Tamar had her own Me Too movement. She did not cover it up. She let it be known. And just like Tamar, we have to tell the truth in the Black community that Black women and girls are victimized by individuals who we know. In school, we learn about stranger danger, but we know that's false. Over 60% of sexual assault victims know their perpetrators. We have a tendency not to tell the truth about sexual victimization of our women and girls. Yeah, just like Tamar, yes, my sisters, it's time to tell the truth about the tears related to our depression, The tears related to our self-esteem. The tears related to our self-worth. It's time for us to tell the truth about the tears of our daughters who are crying out for help. Instead of us saying things to them when they tell us that their uncle has touched them or abused them, we don't respond and say, "What were you wearing?" We will not respond to our daughters and blame them for their own victimization. It's time for us to tell the truth that we need to stop protecting perpetrators and protect our daughters. I remember when I was watching the docuseries and they said, "What were those girls doing at the mall?" Well, they were teenagers. They go to the mall. What were those girls doing at McDonald's? They go to McDonald's. Nobody said, "What was R. Kelly doing grooming girls and going after young girls?" Nobody held adults responsible. Too many times we hold Black women and girls responsible for their own sexual victimization, and it's time for us to tell the truth about the tears. See, some of us want men so bad in our lives that we're willing sometimes to sacrifice our daughters. And it's time for us to be honest about some things in our life. It's time for us to be honest about our own history of this victimization. Every current and former foster child, it's time for you to tell the truth about our tears. However, we'll never be free unless we're willing to tell that truth about the tears. The second thing we need to do is prioritize the pain of Black women and girls. As I studied many of the biblical scholars, I noticed that they did not prioritize Tamar's pain. It became easy for them to situate the narrative of Tamar's rape as a consequence of David's indiscretions and Israel's sin. Tamar's life is seen as just collateral damage of a larger historical narrative that let Amnon, a sex offender, off the hook. Likewise, the pain of Black women and girls has not been prioritized in our community. When we attempt to speak out and give voice to our pain, we are told to be quiet and shut up. Our pain becomes co-opted by conversations related to the legacy of racial oppression against Black men, thus demanding we give Black men a pass regarding our own exploitation. Trust me, many Black women know our job descriptions as it relates to Black men. Our job is to support, love, and advocate and stand by them at the expense of ourselves. I come today to declare that racial oppression of Black men is not an excuse to traumatize Black women sexually. It is time to prioritize the pain of Black women and girls by allowing space for us to be believed and heard. And my final point is this. It is time that Black women and girls get to dictate their own deliverance. We get to dictate our deliverance. Absalom kills Amnon, for raping his sister. The text does not reveal if there was a desire, if that was the desire of Tamar, but Absalom never asked her what she thought she needed regarding her healing. Absalom minimizes the rapes, commands Tamar to be silent and not to set her heart on this matter. The Black community can learn a valuable lesson from Amnon. And I call my sister, Dr. Tiffany Dent, a psychologist who centers the experience of Black women and girls, to kind of anchor this point. She says, we must listen to Black women and girls and allow us to determine what we need for healing. Our healing does not look the same. Some Black women and girls pursue therapy. Some pursue prayer. Some pursue African traditional religions and spirituality. Some pursue mindfulness practices. Some pursue wellness regimens. Some of us pursue being just in the presence of community. But we have to understand that our deliverance should be dictated by us, not someone else. Our deliverance should not ever be co-opted, so that someone else could get the praise and get the glory. But we have to be prioritized, and our deliverance has to be chosen by what we want, what we plan to pursue. So I encourage the community today that we can't afford to be silent any longer. Our women and our girls can't afford for us not to be outspoken, not to provide spaces where we can heal, because it's time for us now to prioritize our women. We are on the front lines doing the work of social justice and activism every day. And nobody asks if we're okay. Nobody comes to check in on us. But I am here today to say that it is time for us to, number one, tell the truth about the tears. Number two, prioritize the pain of Black women and girls. And number three, allow Black women and girls to dictate our own deliverance. God bless you.